You know, there's a really powerful parallel, too, between what we're commemorating today and what we're doing now. Back then, it wasn't just the United States. Here in Normandy, 12 countries came together. 160,000 men
Ukraine.
coming to this beach, coming to start the final fight that ultimately, 11 months later, led to victory in World War II. In Ukraine, we have more than 50 countries standing up, standing together, making sure that Ukraine has what it needs to defend itself and to push back this aggression. And that's the power of our alliances. And that's the biggest difference maker we have in the world.
Are you
Our
kidding
adversaries,
me?
our competitors, they don't have the same kind of voluntary alliances. Yeah, sometimes they coerce countries into helping them, or maybe they pay them off. Here, we have country after country that volunteers to stand together in defense of principles that we share and no need defending. We're seeing that in Ukraine. We saw that 80 years ago here in Normandy.
That's ridiculous. Antony Blinken actually trying to compare Ukraine to Normandy, which is so historically illiterate and offensive, it almost provokes me to violence. Welcome back to the program. Dana Loesch with you at the bottom of this second hour. Can you imagine? That's such a heinous comparison. Such a heinous comparison. I cringe. And he's not the only person who's been doing that. I don't know if you saw this. This was Hillary Clinton 5 hours ago said, quote, 80 years ago today, thousands of brave Americans fought to protect democracy on the shores of Normandy. This November, all we have to do is vote. Wow. Trump is not Hitler, and Republicans aren't Nazis, and you tried to cheat and lost. She attempted in 2016, to undo everything that these World War II heroes fought for by partnering with Fusion GPS to launder discredited Oppo in the press and then merge it out into surveillance warrants on enemies through FISA. And if my World War II grandparents, the World War II vets, grandparents were alive today, they'd slam this. They'd slam her sentiment. They'd slam such a comparison. That's shameful. When people throw around the accomplishments and the bravery and courage of these greatest generation, these veterans, as like a comparison, as some way to substantiate their own behavior, that's the mark of a person who's never done anything. That's just asinine. It's one of the most offensive things I think I've ever heard. You have Biden here as well. This is audio soundbite 8. He does the same thing Antony Blinken does. Listen to this.
Because if we do, Ukraine will be subjugated and will not end there. Ukraine's neighbors will be threatened. All of Europe will be threatened. And make no mistake, the autocrats of the world are watching closely to see what happens in Ukraine, to see if we let this illegal aggression go unchecked. We cannot let that happen. To surrender to bullies, to bow down to dictators is simply unthinkable.
I'm floored that he is in Normandy lecturing everybody, these veterans, about Ukraine, about a foreign land dispute that has nothing to do, not even remotely comparable to what happened in World War II. You absolute, incoherent, historically illiterate asshole. Oh my gosh. I muted it. But you know it. That's so disrespectful. Democrats wanted so bad with his stupid remarks to have a Reagan moment. They wanted him to have his own little Reagan moment, right? And it's embarrassing. How are you standing up there comparing D-Day to Ukraine? It's a foreign land dispute based on a lot of historical disputes between these areas, those two, that geographical location that goes back a century. It's not spreading. It's contained. The only thing if you want me to argue it, the only thing that actually has expanded was NATO. But I'm just saying, it's not even remotely the same. In fact, you can't have it both ways. Let me pull this article up. I was actually not going to get to this until Friday, but I'm doing it now. There was an article that I read the other day, and I was actually going to be bringing it up with Stephen Yates. nobody has paid attention. We talked about it a little bit on the program here. There's been a seismic shift in global power that nobody's talking about. Russia, notes Neil Barnett, has become China's vassal state. Russia's not the threat. China is. They had Gazprom that signed a $309 billion contract, the biggest in its history. Gazprom's a Russian entity. They signed this to supply gas to China. They built a huge pipeline, Power of Siberia, that can withstand temperatures negative 62 Celsius. And it went all through 1,800 miles through the Siberian wilderness all the way to China. They opened it several years ago. Huge celebration. Now they're wanting to do the Power of Siberia 2, an even longer pipeline. And even though you've had 3 of Russia's Nord Stream pipelines, you've had some explosions in that since it was in, 2022. Moscow has been trying to find a way to put where to sell its gas, its dirty gas, since the United States under the last administration was trying to free which is weird. You're going to have NATO as a hedge of defense against Russia, but yet you're going to rely on them for all of your energy. That's wild. So the United States, with our energy resources, we're trying to alleviate that dependency upon those allied nations on Russia for that. And so Gazprom, they posted their first loss in more than 20 years. Their share price plunged. And then now they're trying to establish these more transactions, more of this energy infrastructure with China. But China's trying to drive down the price of Russian gas, so they're playing hardball with them. They've been dragging these negotiations out for forever. And Moscow wants better terms, so they haven't agreed. But it looks like they're probably going to be forced to. And China has an economy that's like 800-something% larger than that of Russia's. They have more people. They have the entire upper hand in this situation. And they have been friendly, but Russia's the second banana to China. Completely. This has been a huge shift in global power, which is another reason why I completely discount these arguments of people like Antony Blinken, whose audio we played coming into the segment, and what Joe Biden just said there talking about Russia. China doesn't give a rat's backside about Ukraine. Only Russia does. Actually, only Russia cares about the Donbas region and Crimea and Sevastopol. China doesn't. Russia does. But they're a second banana to China. Their economy is in tatters. They're not the superpower. They're not the super bad guy power anymore. They're not the mini boss. And so you've been seeing how all of this has been playing out. This threat that they keep talking about, that Democrats and neocons keep talking about, it's not Russia, it's China. And only so much insofar as China can use Russia, but they're more interested in Hong Kong. They're more interested in Taiwan. They have eyes elsewhere. They want to dominate the South Seas. This has been it's interesting. So to hear these people, notice they didn't mention China. Blinken didn't talk about China. Biden didn't mention China in his address. I mean, first off, you're at the Normandy event. You're at the 80th anniversary. You're celebrating the veterans that are there. That is not the time to make a speech trying to extol your money laundering operation in Ukraine. It is not the time to make a highly politicized speech about financing a foreign war in which Americans have zero interest. And doing it in front of these veterans and wasting the precious seconds that they have on earth by doing that. That was so wholly inappropriate and grotesque. But I'm not surprised because it is I'd call him the white trash president, but that's an insult to actual white trash. He just looked like a fool. And those veterans there, I don't know if you saw the expression on some of their faces. I'm telling you. You know, they're watching the guy who heads up an administration that has as a deputy of Health and Human Services a man who wears lipstick and heels to work and says he's a she, but wants to lecture you about health, mental or otherwise. A guy who had a disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, from Kabul, lecturing these veterans here. I mean, it is truly amazing. And so it's just so, oh my gosh, my jaw's on the floor with that. Just so inappropriate. Audio Soundbite 7, he said this too, talking about democracy is at risk. Listen.
Now the question for us is, in our hour of trial, will we do ours? We're living in a time when democracy is more at risk across the world than any point since the end of World War II, since these beaches were stormed in 1944. Now we have to ask ourselves, will we stand against tyranny, against evil, against crushing brutality of the iron fist? Will we stand for freedom? Will we defend democracy? Will we stand together? My answer is yes, and only can be yes.
I'm just amazed at this. My view of history, and I read a lot of history, is out of step with the popular narrative. I don't view Russia as a friend or an ally. I hate communists, and I think you're better dead than red. Loathe communists. For him to, again, we're talking about D-Day. You're talking about World War II. It seems a little bit tone deaf to say this stuff. World War II, and try to compare what's going on in Ukraine to this, especially one of the bloodiest battles, I got to say, was Stalingrad. One of the bloodiest battles in World War II was Stalingrad, and that's when the Germans realized, oh, it's Napoleon 2.0. Look at us. By the way, that's when urban warfare was really, really kind of kicked off, was Stalingrad. The mechanics of that battle, when you couldn't use your heavy artillery, you couldn't use your tanks, it had to be hand to hand, and they knew that. And they fought because they were tired of being rolled across, whether it was by their damn government, their damn commie government that they were mad at, or the Nazis coming in. They were mad. They're just mad, and they had it. The history is amazing. But to stand there and say that, D-Day, again, just acknowledge the veterans, acknowledge how amazing it was. Maybe remark on how that's when we were unified. Maybe instead of drawing division, you desiccated old turd, maybe highlight the unity that we had, that you insist on driving away now. How everybody came together. You had every good force on earth coming together on those beaches 80 years ago. And not just that, but in America. My gosh, we went above and beyond. If they asked us for 50 ships, we'd send 100. Our manufacturing capability, because we were so bound and determined, we had to do it. No one else could do it for us. We couldn't export it out or import it in. We couldn't outsource the work to China or India at the time. It had to be done in the United States. And we had the know-how, we had the desire, we had the willpower and the manpower and woman power, those riveters, to do it. And we did it. We did what needed to be done because it needed to be doing. It needed doing. So we did what needed to be done. That was unity. Everybody came together. You had victory gardens. Women changed their hairstyles to even ration supplies. Fashion changed entirely to support the war effort. Everything was in lockstep to defeat evil. Everyone was on the same page. That's what he should be highlighting. But he's divisive trash. So he promotes divisive trash. He should apologize to those veterans. Shame on him. While his son, with one of his baby mamas, sits in court